A man steps outside with his dog on a cold March evening in Cleveland, Ohio. The neighborhood is quiet. The field near Gin Academy looks the same as it always does. Empty, unremarkable, the kind of place you walk past without thinking twice. But the dog stops and refuses to move on. What that man discovered in the next few moments would stop an entire city in its tracks. It would force a community to grieve two children it had never been given the chance to know, and it would expose a system of courts, agencies, and institutions that had been handed opportunity after opportunity to intervene, and had turned away every single time. This is the story of Amor Wilson and Mila Chatman, two sisters. Two little girls from Cleveland's East Side whose names deserve to be spoken, whose lives deserve to be remembered, and whose story deserves to be told completely and honestly. This is also the story of two fathers who never stopped looking, who called every number available to them, who showed up at every office that was supposed to help, who were told again and again that there was nothing anyone could do. And this is the story of what happens when a system designed to protect the most vulnerable among us decides that a home and a bed is enough and stops asking any further questions. We are going to follow the facts as they have been confirmed by the Cleveland Division of Police, the Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office, court records, and statements made publicly by investigators, family members, and officials. Where information has not been officially confirmed, we will say so clearly. This case is still developing. The legal process is ongoing. But what is already on the public record is devastating enough to demand a full examination. Before we go any further, if you are new to True Crime Vault, welcome. This channel exists to tell the stories that deserve more than a headline. The full investigation, the people behind the names, the systemic questions that too often disappear from the conversation the moment the news cycle moves on. If that matters to you, subscribe right now and hit that notification bell so you never miss an investigation. Hit that like button. It takes 2 seconds and it helps this channel reach people who need to hear these stories. Drop a comment below and tell us what you already know about this case, or what question you most want answered. We read every single one. Now let's get into it. Cleveland, Ohio, specifically the South Collinwood neighborhood on the city's east side. To understand this story fully, you need to understand the place where it unfolded, because place matters. South Collinwood is a community that carries the particular weight of post-industrial American cities. Economic pressure, underfunded institutions, stretched social services, and a kind of systemic invisibility that settles over neighborhoods when the larger structures around them stop paying close attention. It is also a community of real people, families, churches, neighbors who know each other, children who deserve the same safety and the same futures as children anywhere else. Near the intersection of East 162nd Street and Midland Avenue, close to Gin Academy, there is a field, an ordinary field in an ordinary neighborhood. On the evening of March 2nd, 2026, a man was walking his dog through that area when his animal detected something. The man investigated. What he found prompted an immediate call to 911. Cleveland police responded to the scene. Officers confirmed that a suitcase had been partially buried in a shallow grave and that it contained human remains. As they continued to process the surrounding area, a second shallow grave was found, a second suitcase, a second child, two little girls, buried in separate suitcases in a field, steps from a school. Cleveland Police Chief Dorothy Todd spoke publicly about what her department faced in the hours and days that followed. Her words were measured and deliberate. These were two young lives with their entire futures ahead of them, Chief Todd said. Our detectives worked tirelessly and with great care to identify those responsible. Investigations of this nature require patience, precision, and discretion. Unlike what is often portrayed on television, every detail cannot be shared publicly. Certain information must remain confidential to protect the integrity of the investigation and ensure justice for these victims. That careful and methodical work allowed our detectives to develop the evidence needed to make quick identification of a person of interest, ultimately resulting in an arrest. Those words, careful, methodical, patient, reflect something important about how this investigation was conducted. But they also sit alongside a question that this case forces into the open. Where was that careful, methodical attention in the years before March 2nd, 2026? Where was the patience and precision when two fathers were calling agencies and appearing in courtrooms and asking for help finding their daughters? That question does not diminish the work of the detectives who solved this case in less than 48 hours. It points to a different part of the system, a part that had years to act and did not. Investigators faced an immediate challenge on the night of March 2nd that is both procedurally significant and, when you sit with it, quietly devastating. There were no active missing children reports matching the descriptions of either child. No Amber Alert had been issued. No frantic family member had filed a recent report. These two little girls had been absent from public life, from schools, from community visibility, from any institutional radar, and no alarm had sounded. The Cuyahoga County Medical Examiner's Office worked through the night and into the following days, conducting forensic examination and DNA relationship testing. On the evening of March 5, 2026, 3 days after the discovery, the Medical Examiner's Office officially confirmed the identities of both children. The older child was Amor Wilson from Cleveland. The younger child was Mila Chatman, also from Cleveland. They were half-sisters, sharing the same mother, confirmed through DNA relationship testing. The official cause of death for both children was listed as pending at the time of identification. That determination, as of the writing of this script, had not been publicly released, and we will not speculate about it here. What the medical examiner and the police chief both confirmed was that the children had been deceased for some time before their discovery. The precise timeline of when they died and how long they had been in that field is part of the ongoing forensic and legal record that will be fully established in the course of the prosecution. Now, before we go any further into the investigation and the arrest, we need to stop and talk about who these two children actually were. Because in cases like this one, the procedural details and the systemic analysis and the legal timeline can sometimes crowd out the most important thing, the reality of the two lives that were lost. And that cannot happen here. Amor Wilson. Her name itself carries meaning. Amor, the word for love in both Latin and Spanish. She was the older sister, the one who, in the natural order of siblings, would have been looking out for the younger one. She had a grandmother named Nichelle Wilson who, in the days after the discovery, stood at the growing memorial near the site where her granddaughter was found. She stood there surrounded by teddy bears, flowers, and balloons left by a community in mourning. A community that had never met these children but felt their loss with the immediacy of something close and personal. Amor had a father, a man who, like Mila's father, spent years trying to reach his daughter through every channel available to him. His story runs parallel to the story of Mila's father in ways that are both heartbreaking and, when examined clearly, deeply troubling from an institutional standpoint. Mila Chatman. Her father is Deshaun Chatman. He spoke publicly in the days following the discovery, and what he said about his daughter has stayed with everyone who heard it. He described her the way only a father who truly knew his child could describe her, not in the abstract language of grief, but in specifics, in the details that only someone who was present and paying attention would know. Mila was happy-go-lucky, always smiling. Chatman said. Favorite color was pink. She swore that she was a princess. She was always happy. She was a kid's kid. A kid's kid. Think about what that phrase means. A child so naturally and effortlessly joyful that other children were drawn to her. A little girl who declared herself a princess, not from arrogance but from the pure, uncomplicated confidence of a child who believed the world was full of good things and that she belonged in the brightest part of it. Deshaun Chatman was a restaurant cook. He and the children's mother had not been married but had lived together for a period after Mila was born. At some point after their separation, he began losing contact with his daughter. Phone numbers stopped working. The address he had was no longer accurate. The mother moved, and he could not find them. The last time Deshaun Chatman saw his daughter was in 2020. She was very young, barely old enough to have memories that would last, old enough to smile for a camera, old enough to love pink, old enough to be absolutely certain she was a princess. From 2020 forward, Chatman spent 5 years trying to find her. 5 years. And what he encountered during those 5 years is at the very heart of what this story is actually about. He called Child Protective Services, the agency specifically designed to investigate and respond to concerns about the welfare of children. He was told, according to his account, that because the children had a home and a bed, there was no basis for intervention. A home and a bed, that was the threshold being applied, not whether the children were safe, not whether they were being isolated from family members who were actively trying to reach them, not whether a father's sustained, documented concern about his daughter's welfare warranted investigation. A home and a bed. He went to family court seeking emergency custody. His requests were denied. The specific legal reasoning behind those denials has not been fully detailed in publicly available records, but the outcome is not in dispute. He was turned away. He called the police requesting welfare checks. He was denied access. He described what those 5 years felt like in public statements that have been widely reported. I've been calling CPS, going to the courts, trying to get emergency custody, calling the police for welfare checks. But they denied all access. And in a statement that has stayed with people who followed this case, he addressed the mother directly, speaking about words that had apparently been said to him at some point during those years of effort. I've been trying to get her for 6 years. You've been ducking me. You told me I was too family-oriented. That's why you ain't giving my daughter. Been tried, then talked to CPS numerous occasions. Too family-oriented. Sit with that for a moment. A father's deep and sustained investment in his child's life, his determination to be present, to be involved, to pursue every legal and institutional avenue available to him, was apparently cited at some point as a reason to deny him access to his daughter. Whatever the full context of that statement may have been, the documented outcome is clear. He was denied. His daughter was not found. And Mila, it turned out, had been living within visible distance of where her remains were eventually discovered. I don't know how long she's been gone, how long she's been dead, Chatman said. I don't know how long she's been missing, but it could have been prevented. Amor's father experienced the same pattern. Both fathers, Deshaun Chatman confirmed publicly, had been trying to reach their daughters and had been unable to do so because the mother moved frequently and consistently made herself and the children unavailable. We both was in a position where we couldn't get her because the mother always left, Chatman said. 2 fathers, 2 children, years of documented persistent effort, and at every point of contact with the systems that existed to help, courts, child protective services, law enforcement, the same result. Nothing actionable, nothing that would have placed these children in a different situation. Chatman's grief, in the days following the discovery, was profound and visible. He stood at the growing memorial near East 162nd Street and laid flowers for his daughter. He shared photographs of Mila, a bright-smiled little girl, photographed years earlier, the last image he had of her alive. He spoke to reporters not just from grief, but from a determination that something be understood, that something be changed. I just feel useless, he said. I couldn't save my baby. To understand the full arc of this case, we have to go back further, back to the life of the woman who has been charged with these deaths. Not because her history excuses anything. It does not. But because understanding how a tragedy of this magnitude develops over time is essential to understanding how it might have been prevented and where the points of intervention were that went unused. Aaliyah Henderson was 28 years old at the time of her arrest. She was born and raised on Cleveland's East Side. According to records obtained by 3 News Investigates through an extensive review of police documents and court records spanning more than a decade, Henderson was, by early accounts, a young woman with academic promise. Police records from 2014 described her as a student with a 4.0 GPA, the kind of academic performance that speaks to focus, discipline, and potential. But something shifted in the summer of 2014. Henderson was 16 years old. According to a Cleveland police report from that period, she began withdrawing from the people around her. She cut off friends, she blocked family members on social media, she ran away from home. She was reported missing on July 6, 2014, and was found safe approximately 36 hours later, just blocks from her East 105th Street home, the same East Side neighborhood where, more than a decade later, 2 young children would be found. Whatever was driving that withdrawal in the summer of 2014 has not been fully explained in any publicly available record. But the change was real and documented. A young woman who had been excelling academically entered a period of significant instability. Weeks after being found following her disappearance, Henderson was the victim of an assault. According to a Cleveland police report from August 2014, She was attacked by a group of other young people on a public transit bus near Woodland Avenue. No suspects were ever identified. Henderson, already a teenager who had recently run away from home and been through whatever had caused that withdrawal, now carried the additional weight of a violent victimization with no accountability attached to it. 2 years later, in July 2016, Henderson was the victim of a domestic violence incident at her East 105th Street home. According to a Cleveland police report, a family member was arrested after allegedly throwing her into a wall and striking her. A neighbor told officers this kind of violence at that address was a regular occurrence. Henderson was transported to a hospital with a possible injury. We include this history not to generate sympathy for someone charged with the most serious of crimes, but because it belongs in an honest account of this case. Aldiyar Henderson, before she became a defendant, was a young person who experienced documented trauma, documented violence, and documented instability over a period of years, and who, by every available public record, received no meaningful intervention or sustained support during that time. She was failed before she became a person accused of failing others. That is a fact that belongs in this story, because it speaks to a broader pattern of institutional neglect that threads through this entire case. By the time Henderson became a mother, she was carrying years of unaddressed difficulty. The children in her care, and a third child who was found alive in her home on the day of her arrest, were born into circumstances already shaped by that history. The picture that emerges from records and documents in the years that followed is one of increasing isolation. Henderson moved frequently. This made it difficult for anyone, including the fathers of her children, to maintain consistent contact or locate the family. The children were apparently being homeschooled, meaning they were not regularly seen by teachers, administrators, school counselors, or any of the other mandatory reporters who interact with children daily and are legally required to report signs of concern to authorities. To neighbors and outside observers, the home Henderson kept appeared well maintained. A city councilman who spoke publicly in the aftermath of the arrest specifically noted that the girls had allegedly been homeschooled and that the home appeared to be a well-kept house. That word, appeared, carries everything that matters in this case. In April 2025, Henderson filed a routine police report about a package theft, an ordinary interaction with law enforcement. Nothing in that interaction would have signaled, to any officer responding to it, what investigators believe was happening inside that home. By February 2026, just weeks before the discovery, something had shifted. According to a Cleveland police report, a neighbor came to the local police district to report that Henderson had been behaving in a threatening manner toward them, following them to nearby stores and appearing uninvited at their home. The case was filed as menacing by stalking, a documented behavioral escalation in the weeks immediately preceding March 2, 2026. That report was taken. It was filed, and as far as any publicly available record indicates, nothing further happened in response to it. Now to the investigation itself, and to the 48 hours that followed the discovery on March 2nd. Cleveland's homicide detectives worked through the night. They canvassed the South Collinwood neighborhood around East 162nd Street and Midland Avenue. They spoke with witnesses. They reviewed surveillance footage from cameras in the area. They examined the physical evidence at the scene, and they began the process of identifying the two children whose remains had been found. On March 4th, less than 48 hours after the discovery, investigators had identified a person of interest and executed a search warrant at a nearby residence. The address was in the same general area where the children had been found. The person of interest was Aldiyar Henderson. When officers entered the home, they found Henderson. They also found a third child who appeared to be in good health. That child was immediately taken into the protective custody of the Department of Children and Family Services. Henderson was taken into custody. Body camera footage captured the moment of arrest, footage that was later released publicly. She was transported to the Cuyahoga County Jail where booking video, also subsequently released, showed her being processed through the intake procedure. On March 5, 2026, the Cleveland Division of Police confirmed publicly that Aldiyar Henderson had been charged with 2 counts of aggravated murder, 1 for each child. The charges were first-degree felonies. Under Ohio law, a conviction on aggravated murder charges can carry a sentence of life imprisonment. Given the nature of the charges and the circumstances, The maximum penalty available under Ohio law was noted by legal analysts covering the case. Henderson had no prior criminal record, no documented history of violence toward others in public records available at the time of the arrest. That detail, the absence of any prior formal record, is one of the elements that makes this case so difficult to process from the outside. She is not someone who appeared, on paper or by any external measure, to be a person capable of what she is now charged with. The arraignment took place on March 6, 2026, in Cleveland Municipal Court before Judge Shannon Gallagher. Prosecutors requested a bond of $2 million. The judge set bond at exactly that amount, effectively $1 million per count. Henderson has remained in custody since her arrest. The courtroom proceedings took an immediate and somewhat unusual turn around the question of legal representation. The Cuyahoga County Public Defender's Office moved to represent Henderson in the criminal matter, citing an existing attorney-client relationship established through a separate, ongoing custody proceeding involving her surviving child. The Public Defender's Office argued that this prior relationship, combined with national standards encouraging early and continuous representation, justified their appointment to the criminal case as well. The prosecution objected. Their position was that the court should follow local rules governing counsel assignment. Judge Gallagher sided with the prosecution's procedural argument, not on the merits of the public defender's position, but on the basis of a local rule tying counsel assignment to the final digit of a case number. Henderson's case number ended in an even digit, making her eligible for assignment of private counsel under that rule. "This is my 12th year on the bench," Judge Gallagher said, "and I have never once been asked, by an attorney, to be assigned to a case. This case ends in the number 6. It's an even number. Treating it like any other case that I would, I'm going to assign private counsel." Private attorney Kevin Spellacy was assigned to the criminal matter. The Public Defender's Office, for its part, issued a public statement defending its conduct and pushing back against what it characterized as inappropriate involvement by the prosecution in the appointment process. The statement noted that state rules on the assignment of counsel prohibit influence by anyone involved in prosecuting criminal cases, and called the prosecution's characterization of the public defender's request as improper, both inflammatory and reflective of a misunderstanding of the public defender's role. The Public Defender's Office continued to represent Henderson in the separate custody matter involving her surviving child. The case was referred to a grand jury to determine whether a formal indictment would be returned. That process was ongoing as of the writing of this script. There is something that legal analysts and child welfare advocates have both raised in the context of this case that deserves careful examination: the question of what the Child Protective Services system is actually designed to do, and whether what it is designed to do is adequate for situations like this one. The standard that CPS reportedly applied when Deshaun Chatman contacted the agency, that children with a home and a bed do not meet the threshold for investigation, reflects a particular philosophy about when the state is justified in intervening in a family situation. That philosophy has legitimate roots. The principle that families should not face government intervention without meaningful cause is an important one. The concern that CPS involvement can itself cause harm to children and families is real and documented. But that philosophy, applied mechanically and without contextual judgment, produces gaps. And the gap it produced in this case is the gap between a child has a home and a bed and a child is safe. Those are not the same thing. They were never the same thing. And a father calling an agency 5 times, appearing in court seeking emergency custody, requesting welfare checks, and being turned away at every point. That father's sustained, documented concern is itself a form of evidence. It is information. It is a signal that something may be wrong, even if the external indicators have not yet crossed a formal threshold. Cuyahoga County Children and Family Services declined to provide any information about their history of contact with the Henderson family when contacted by media outlets covering this case. They cited both confidentiality laws and a directive from the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office to withhold information connected to the active case. That directive makes legal sense. The prosecution has a legitimate interest in controlling what information enters the public domain before trial. But it means the full picture of what the agency knew, when, and what decisions were made in response has not been made available. What is in the public record, because Deshaun Chatman put it there in his own words and with his name attached, is this. He contacted that agency multiple times. He was turned away. His daughter was not found. The homeschooling dimension of this case adds another layer to the institutional analysis. Ohio, like most states, provides parents with a legal right to educate their children at home. The oversight framework for homeschooling in Ohio requires parents to submit annual notification to their local school district, along with basic curriculum documentation. Child welfare advocates have noted that this framework, while legally sound in principle, creates a significant gap in the visibility network that otherwise surrounds children. When a child attends school, they are seen every single day by adults who are trained as mandatory reporters, teachers, counselors, administrators, and who are legally required to report signs of abuse or neglect to authorities. That daily contact is not just educational. It is, in practice, one of the primary mechanisms by which society catches what happens behind closed doors. When a child is homeschooled and a parent actively limits their contact with the outside world, that visibility largely disappears. The mandatory reporter network that would otherwise surround those children collapses. And if the child's extended family, grandparents, non-custodial parents, aunts and uncles, are also being kept at a distance, the child's connection to any external protection becomes almost non-existent. This is not an argument against homeschooling broadly. The overwhelming majority of families who choose to educate their children at home do so for legitimate reasons, and those children are safe and well cared for. But it is an honest examination of how a legal arrangement can, in specific circumstances, be used in ways that remove children from visibility at precisely the moment when visibility matters most. Near East 162nd Street and Midland Avenue, in the days following the discovery, a memorial grew. Community members who had never met Amor or Mila brought teddy bears and flowers and balloons. They brought candles. They stood together, and they mourned two children they had never known, in the way that communities sometimes do when a loss is large enough that it belongs to everyone. Nichelle Wilson, Amor's grandmother, stood at that memorial. The grief on her face in photographs from those days is the kind that does not perform itself. It is simply there, quietly, the way a weight is simply there. Mila Chatman stood at that memorial. He brought flowers. He showed reporters photographs of his daughter, a bright-eyed little girl photographed years earlier, smiling in the uncomplicated way that only very young children smile. She was very young in those photographs, young enough that the world still seemed entirely good to her. A candlelight vigil was organized by community activists on the evening of March 6th. People from throughout the South Collinwood neighborhood came. People who had no direct connection to the family came. Because when children die, and when a community gathers to acknowledge that loss together, something essential about shared humanity insists on expressing itself. Mayor Justin Bibb released a statement following the arrest. "I want to thank our homicide detectives and members of the Division of Police for their incredible work in this case," Mayor Bibb said. Their dedication and persistence led to a quick arrest in connection with the tragic deaths of two young children whose bodies were discovered earlier this week. This has shocked our community. We love and protect our young people, and the loss of these two children is unimaginable. Our hearts are with everyone who is grieving this tragedy. City Councilman Mike Polensek, representing the ward where the children were found, offered a reflection that captured what many people in the community were feeling. "The community is relieved, but saddened," Polensek said. "There's two young children that are gone. Their whole future is gone. We have no idea what happened, what they went through toward the end of their lives." He also noted something that speaks directly to the invisible nature of the situation. The children had allegedly been homeschooled and the home had appeared well kept. Appeared. That word continues to do a great deal of work in this story. Aaliyah Henderson is, as of this writing, presumed innocent under the law. She has been charged. She has not been tried. She has not been convicted. The legal process exists for a reason, and it will take its course through the grand jury, through a potential indictment, through pre-trial proceedings, and eventually through a trial in which the full body of evidence will be presented and examined. What that trial will establish, the precise forensic picture of what happened to Amor and Mila, the timeline of events inside that home, the evidence collected during the search warrant execution, the full context of the investigation, is information that belongs to the legal proceedings and will become part of the public record in due course. We will cover every significant development as it occurs. Deshaun Chatman, standing at his daughter's memorial with flowers in his hands and 5 years of effort behind him, made a request of the public and the institutions listening. Not just grief, not just anger, a specific request, articulated clearly, for something to be different going forward. Change these laws, he said. Make it better. A man do have a say-so in their child's life, married or unmarried. That is not a radical statement. It is not politically inflammatory. It is a father who spent years trying to find his daughter, who was turned away at every institutional door he knocked on, who is now standing at her memorial asking, with a patience and a dignity that the circumstances do not require of him, that the system that failed him and failed her be examined and changed. Whether the specific decisions made by specific agencies in specific interactions with Deshaun Chatman and Amor's father were reasonable applications of existing law and policy, or whether they represented failures of judgment that a better designed system would not have produced, is a question that investigators, legislators, and policy advocates will need to answer. That examination should happen, it should be sustained, and it should produce something beyond a news cycle. Because the question at the center of this case is not just what Aaliyah Henderson allegedly did, it is also what happened in the years before March 2nd, 2026. What happened when fathers called and were told there was nothing to be done? What happened when a behavioral escalation was documented by a neighbor in February 2026 and filed as a police report that apparently produced no further action? What happened when 2 children disappeared from institutional visibility behind a policy of homeschooling and frequent relocation, and no mechanism existed to check whether they were safe? Those questions do not have easy answers. They involve genuine tensions between parental rights and child safety, between government intervention and family autonomy, between the resources that exist and the needs that don't fit neatly into existing categories. But they are questions that Amor Wilson and Mila Chatman, 2 little girls from Cleveland's East Side who deserved futures, have now made impossible to ignore. Near the intersection of East 162nd Street and Midland Avenue in the South Collinwood neighborhood of Cleveland, Ohio, the memorial continues to grow. Teddy bears, flowers, balloons, the offerings of a community that refuses to let 2 children be reduced to a case number in a news segment. Amor Wilson. Her name means love. Mila Chatman. She loved pink. She was, her father said, a kid's kid. Happy, always smiling, absolutely certain she was a princess. Both of these children had fathers who never stopped looking. Both of them had families who grieved and continue to grieve. Both of them deserved to grow up in the world, to have breakfast tables and volleyball games and ordinary Tuesday mornings and all the small, accumulating moments that make up a life. They did not get those things, and the institutions that had been given the opportunity to change that outcome, and did not, owe those children and their families and this community a full accounting. We will be here for every development in this case as it moves through the legal system, every hearing, every piece of evidence that enters the public record, every question that gets answered and every new one that emerges. Because Amor and Mila deserve to have their story told completely and honestly. Because Deshaun Chatman and Amor's father deserve to have their years of effort witnessed and remembered. And because the systemic failures this case has exposed deserve sustained attention, not just while the story is trending, but for as long as it takes for something to actually change. If this investigation moved you, if you believe Amor Wilson and Mila Chatman deserve to be remembered, and if you believe the failures this case has exposed deserve more than a single news cycle, please subscribe to True Crime Vault. Hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this story. And drop a comment below. Tell us what part of this hit you hardest. What question you most want answered. What you think needs to change. We read every comment. Every single one. Amor. Mila. We will not forget their names.